We often get caught up in the big stuff with firearms, don't we? Caliber, capacity, the overall look and feel.
Yeah, the headline features.
Exactly. But today, we're zooming way in, focusing on something that seems almost, well, simple. The pistol trigger.
Just a lever you pull, right?
That's how it looks. Easy to think it's just simple mechanics moving parts around.
Uh-huh. But like a lot of things we cover, the reality is, well, it's quite different.
Totally different. That little point of contact, the trigger, is actually incredibly critical to how a pistol works.
Absolutely critical. Its design, how it functions, it has huge impacts on accuracy, speed, even safety, big consequences.
So that's our focus today. We're diving deep into pistol triggers, not just the act of pulling one, but the different kinds, what makes them tick, and why those differences really matter.
Yeah, trying to give you a clearer picture, whether you shoot a lot, you're just starting, or maybe you're just curious about how these things actually work.
Okay, so where do we start? How should we break this down?
Well, I think it makes sense to tackle the main types, and probably the easiest one to grasp conceptually is the single action only trigger, the SAO.
SAO, okay. Single action only. The name kind of gives it away, doesn't it? It does one thing.
Exactly. It performs one single action. It releases the hammer or striker, which is already cocked.
And sources say these are pretty common in rifles, carbines.
Mhm.
Why is that? And what makes them good for, say, precision shooting?
Well, it comes down to that simplicity, really, because the trigger's only job is dropping that hammer that's already cocked and ready to go. The internal parts, the engagement surfaces, can be refined. They can be minimized.
Ah, okay. And that allows for what people call a crisp break and a lighter pull.
Precisely. A lighter pull weight overall and a very clean, crisp trigger break.
And that break, that's the exact moment the hammer falls,
Yeah.
the shot fires.
The moment, yeah. And the feel of that break, whether it feels lighter than the initial take-up or if there's a distinct wall you hit right before it breaks, that gives the shooter really clear feedback.
So you know exactly when it's going to go.
Uh-huh. That predictability is a huge part of why they're favored for accuracy.
Right. Now, in repeating firearms, like a semi-auto pistol or even a bolt-action rifle, the action cycles and recocks the hammer anyway.
Correct.
So the SAO trigger's job is the same every time. Just drop the hammer again.
Always the same job. Release the already cocked hammer. The key is that the hammer is already tensioned, either because you cocked it manually or the gun cycled. The trigger just lets that energy go.
And the classic example everyone points to is the 1911 pistol.
The quintessential SAO handgun, yeah.
Our sources really dig into why its trigger is so revered. It's not just light, but that street-back pull.
Mm.
It engages the sear differently. What's the sear again?
The sear is the part that physically holds the hammer back under tension. And yes, the 1911's trigger design, that straight back movement, is key. Well, think about the whole system. That straight pull minimizes any tendency to push the muzzle sideways as you're pressing the trigger. Combine that with the 1911's typically narrow grip, the grip angle, it all works together.
For natural pointing and accuracy.
Exactly. It points naturally for many people, and that light, straight trigger pull doesn't disturb your aim nearly as much. It was a very deliberate design for precision. Became a benchmark, really.
And consistency must play a huge role, too. The pull weight is basically identical shot after shot with an SAO, right?
Absolutely identical, assuming the gun is functioning correctly. And that consistency is just paramount for shooting accurately.
Why is that?
Because accuracy is fundamentally about repeatability. Doing the exact same thing every time. If the gun performs identically every time you pull the trigger, it makes it much easier for you to perform consistently.
Makes sense. But there's a flip side, isn't there?
Yeah.
Especially for newer shooters.
There is. Because the pull is so light and often so short, the potential for an unintentional discharge is higher if you're not well trained, or frankly, if your focus slips.
So it raises questions about where SAO fits best. Maybe not ideal for high-stress self-defense for someone without tons of practice.
That's the common thinking. They excel in controlled environments, target ranges, competition where precision is key. But yeah, in a high-stress scenario, that very light trigger could be a liability without extensive dedicated training.
Which is why most modern SAO pistols have a manual safety, right?
Almost invariably, yes. That manual safety becomes a really crucial backup. Essential, really.
Okay, so SAO. Simple concept, great for accuracy, but demands discipline and often a manual safety. Let's shift gears. Double action only. DAO.
Right, DAO.
Sounds like it's doing more work.
It definitely is. Double action only. It performs 2 actions with 1 trigger pull. First, it cocks the hammer or striker, bringing it back under tension.
Okay.
And then, as you continue pulling the trigger, it releases that hammer or striker to fire the shot.
So cocking and firing in one pull.
Yeah.
That sounds like it would feel very different.
Oh, completely different. It results in a trigger pull that's noticeably heavier and usually much longer than an SAO trigger.
And where do we see these most often? Revolvers, obviously.
Classic application, yes. But also in some semi-auto designs, you see DAO variants of pistols like, say, the SIG P226 sometimes.
What's the main advantage? Why design a trigger like that?
Primarily, it's about adding a layer of inherent safety against accidental discharges, especially perhaps for people with less firearms experience.
Because it takes a much more deliberate effort to pull it.
Exactly. That long, heavy pull means you really have to mean to fire the gun. It's not something likely to happen with just a light brush against the trigger.
And it's consistent, right? Every pull feels the same.
Yes, like the SAO in that respect, every single trigger pull is identical, long, and heavy.
Now, with a revolver, the trigger pull does even more, doesn't it? It also turns the cylinder.
That's a great point, yes. In a typical double-action revolver, the trigger mechanism is linked to rotate the cylinder to the next chamber and lock it in place, all while cocking the hammer. So it's quite a complex mechanical sequence.
But the big downside seems pretty obvious. Accuracy must suffer.
That's the major trade-off, yes. That long, heavy pull makes it much, much harder to keep the sights perfectly aligned on the target throughout the entire trigger press.
More time and pressure means more chance to wiggle off target.
Precisely. There's just more opportunity to introduce movement to pull the gun off target before the shot breaks. That's why achieving real accuracy with a DAO trigger takes, as the source material rightly says, a tremendous amount of training and practice.
So it seems safer maybe for novices in stress, but the expert view seems to lean towards just get better training anyway.
Look, that's certainly my perspective. While the mechanical safety of a DAO trigger might, offer some buffer against negligence, there's no substitute for proper training. Solid fundamentals and safe handling and trigger control work regardless of the trigger type, relying solely on the mechanism isn't the ideal solution.
Okay, so that brings us to a system that tried to bridge the gap. Double action, single action, the DASA. These came about in the 1930s.
That's right, developed primarily to enhance safety for combat or service pistols.
What was the thinking there? How does it work?
The idea was to combine aspects of both. The first shot is fired in double action mode, so you get that long, heavy pull that cocks and releases the hammer.
For that initial safety factor in stressful situations.
Exactly. Reduces the chance of an accidental discharge when drawing or under duress. But then after that first shot fires, the cycling of the slide automatically cocks the hammer.
So subsequent shots are different.
Correct. All follow-up shots are fired in single action mode with a much lighter, shorter trigger pull, similar to an SAO.
So, heavy first shot for safety, lighter subsequent shots for better accuracy and speed. That was the rationale.
That was absolutely the rationale, and many DASA pistols include a decocking lever.
What's that for?
After you chamber a round, the hammer is cocked. The decocker lets you safely lower that hammer without firing the gun, returning it to the double action state for that first shot carry condition.
Examples.
Well, you see dedicated levers on guns like the SIG P220 series, or sometimes it's combined with the safety lever, like on the Beretta 92FS.
And these were really common for a while, weren't they? Especially police sidearms.
Oh, yeah. For decades, DASA was pretty much the standard for police semi-automatics in the U.S. before Glock and other striker-fired guns really took over. It was seen as that practical compromise.
But there's always a but, isn't there? The big issue seems to be that first shot versus the follow-up shots.
That's the main criticism, yes. That transition from a long, heavy DA pull to a short, light SA pull is, well, it's jarring. It's inconsistent.
Hard to manage.
Very hard for many shooters to manage consistently, especially under pressure. That first DA shot requires a different technique, really, than the subsequent SA shots.
And the sources mention that this often leads to people, especially less experienced ones, just plain missing that first critical shot.
It happens frequently, yes. Mastering that heavy first pull takes dedicated practice.
And there was even that disturbing historical footnote about some police training in the 80s and 90s.
Yeah, the practice of teaching officers to essentially throw away the first DA shot, Just fire it off target quickly to get to the easier SA mode.
That sounds incredibly dangerous.
It was unbelievably irresponsible, fundamentally unsafe, and just goes against everything about accountable shooting. Every round needs to be aimed. But it really highlights how difficult some found that DASA transition to be.
Wow, okay, so DASA, an attempt at the best of both worlds, but created its own consistency problems. Let's move to striker-fired triggers. Now, the source says these are technically a type of DAO. How does that work?
It's a good point to clarify. Yes, technically, most striker-fired systems function like a DAO in that the trigger pull completes the cocking action and releases the striker. The striker itself is like an internal firing pin combined with a hammer function.
But it doesn't feel like those heavy revolver DAO triggers at all.
Not at all. That's the key difference in practice. Because they aren't moving a large external hammer, striker-fired triggers are typically much lighter and have a shorter pull than traditional hammer-fired DAOs.
They often partially cock the striker when the slide cycles, right?
Exactly. The striker is often preset, maybe halfway or two-thirds cocked by the slide's movement. Then the trigger pull finishes that cocking action and releases it.
And Glock is the obvious example here. Pretty much all their guns use this except maybe the .22s.
Correct. Glock really pioneered and popularized the modern striker-fired pistol. It's their defining trigger system.
So what are the main benefits people point to?
Consistency is a big one. Every single trigger pull feels the same, like an SAO or DAO in that respect. But the pull weight is generally light enough for good shooting, yet heavy enough to provide some safety against accidental discharge.
Kind of a middle ground.
Sort of aiming for that sweet spot, yeah. And they often have less over travel, too. That's the trigger movement after the shot breaks. Shorter reset is also often cited.
Now, the source mentions early Glocks getting flack for their triggers, feeling spongy or mushy.
They did. Some of that was subjective preference, some maybe due to the early polymer materials, maybe the frame ergonomics on the original models didn't fit everyone well.
And that reputation sometimes unfairly stuck to all striker-fired guns for a while.
It definitely did. People sometimes dismiss later much improved streaker designs from Glock and other companies based on those early criticisms. And to be fair, some other early striker-fired guns, like the original S&W Sigma, genuinely had pretty awful triggers.
But things have changed. Modern striker triggers are better.
Oh, vastly better. Material science, design improvements. Many modern striker-fired pistols have truly excellent triggers now. Crisp, consistent, with good reset. They absolutely rival good SAO or DASA triggers in terms of shootability for many people.
Okay, that leaves one more category, electronic triggers. Sounds futuristic. The source says they're pretty rare in handguns.
Extremely rare. You really only find them in very high-end specialized target pistols, often rimfire target guns for Olympic-style disciplines.
How do they even work? No mechanical linkage?
Essentially, yes. Instead of cams and levers, pulling the trigger activates an electronic switch. That switch sends a signal to release the hammer or striker electrically.
What's the point of that?
The main advantage is the potential for an incredibly light and finely adjustable trigger pull. You remove almost all the mechanical friction.
So, ultimate precision potential.
That's the goal, yeah. For disciplines where the tiniest disturbance matters, an electronic trigger can offer an edge.
But there have to be downsides. Reliability seems like the obvious one.
That's the major hurdle. You're relying on electronics, circuits, a power source, usually a battery.
Things that don't like getting wet or dropped.
Exactly. A hard impact, moisture, battery failure. Any of those could make the trigger stop working completely, unlike a purely mechanical system, which is generally much more robust.
So, definitely not something you'd want for self-defense or military use.
Absolutely not. In those roles, absolute reliability in harsh conditions is non-negotiable. Electronic triggers just aren't there, and likely won't be suitable for that kind of use. Think of it like a race car versus a dependable truck.
Right. Okay, so we've covered the main types: SAO, DAO, DASA, striker-fired, and electronic. After all that, the big question for anyone listening is, which one is actually best? Which one should you choose?
And the answer, maybe unsatisfyingly but truthfully, is there's no single best. It really, really depends on you, your preferences, and crucially, what you intend to use the firearm for.
So for self-defense, what's the takeaway? Can any of these work?
Our sources and general consensus suggest that yes, any of the main mechanical types, SAO, DAO, DASA, striker-fired, can be perfectly suitable for self-defense. Provided you get the proper training and practice with that specific system. You need to master whichever one you choose.
Makes sense. What about competition? Does intended use make a difference there?
It often does. Someone shooting long-range precision might really value that super light, maybe two-stage trigger found on some specialized SAO guns.
Okay.
Whereas someone shooting, say, action pistol sports like USPSA or three-gun might prefer a very light, very short reset single-stage trigger, whether that's an SAO or a highly tuned striker-fired gun. Speed and consistency are key there.
But cutting across all of that, the absolute bottom line seems to be practice.
That's it. Regardless of the trigger type on your gun, there's just no substitute for consistent quality practice. Knowing your trigger, being able to press it smoothly without disturbing your sights, that comes from range time, dry fire focused effort.
No trigger system magically makes you a good shot.
None at all. Proficiency, reliability, safety. That's built through training and familiarity, not just by buying a certain type of trigger.
So that seemingly simple part, the trigger, really is the crucial link between your decision to fire and the shot actually happening.
It's the interface.
Yeah.
Understanding how yours works, its nuances, its strengths, its weaknesses, that's fundamental to mastering the firearm.
Definitely something to think about more deeply, maybe more than we usually do when considering your own gear and your training approach. It's not just a lever.
Not just a lever at all.